Hi, I'm Unzube Ufodike and welcome back to another exciting episode of Slay Stories. This episode is about the third sector. And for those that are wondering, it is that part of a society that's outside of the private sector, which is the business and, entrepreneurship space, and the public sector, which is generally the government. So the third sector sits within and is sometimes called the voluntary or the non-profits and involves civic engagement that pushes society forward. And many civilizations and societies basically function better with a very active third sector. Here in the UK, there was a big push a couple of years ago when we had David Cameron do the big society branding, trying to get more people to take ownership of supporting others. And back in Nigeria and in many parts of Africa, we do have a very active third sector, which sometimes relies a bit too much on international donors. However, there are also several grassroots organizations that support development. So sit back, relax, and enjoy and learn a bit more, because for this episode, we have a very experienced gentleman who has been working in the third sector for the best part of 2 decades. Like, subscribe, share, and comment on our brand new episode covering the third sector and the community's impact in society's development. Thank you.
Greetings and welcome to Slay Stories. I'm your host, Unzube Ufodike, of a brand new show that spotlights inspiring individuals and initiatives that are championing diversity in their own unique way while slaying in their lane. Here, we shine a light on ignored, forgotten, and in some cases, erased his and her stories, whilst making space for inclusive narratives that challenge stereotypes and increase visibility. Today's episode is on community and the third sector's role in building inclusive societies. Our special guest with us here in the studios is John Mensah. John is the founder and CEO of Outreach Management Services, which provides consultancy services to charities, faith-based and voluntary organizations. He is a renowned charity and fundraising consultant with immense experience in the third sector. He is also a speaker, mentor, trainer, and author of Breaking the Golden Pod, a step-by-step guide to trust fundraising for small organizations. He is also my friend and personal mentor. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much, Nzube.
Thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
No, the pleasure is mine. So there's a lot of work you've done within the third sector. So if we can just dive right into it. So I know you've been in the third sector for quite some time. 2-part question. First, how did you get into this sector in the first place, and what made you decide to focus and remain within this space?
I think getting into the sector was by accident, mainly because when I finished university, I had to do my national service for 1 year.
Yeah.
And after my national service, then it dawned on me that I have to look for a job. And the very first job I got was within the voluntary sector. I got an employment as a project officer of a charity. And that's how it started. I didn't have any experience, no idea, nothing about voluntary sector, but I learned so much on the job. And since then...
what did that charity do?
The charity was called Help the Aged.
Yeah.
They were helping elderly people, empower them to become more independent, and also advocated for society to provide services for their benefits.
Perfect.
And I worked for them for 7 years. I rose through the ranks to become the country director of the charity. Yeah. And having gotten to that level, I then realized that I've fallen in love with it. So I decided not to leave the sector. I've left that organization, but I have since remained in the sector, working in various capacities, to help society's socioeconomic development.
Amazing. So it's focusing on socioeconomic development,
Yes.
but also focusing within the third sector to make those changes in society.
Absolutely.
And what kind of roles do you have to play within this sector to support communities, faith-based organizations, etc.?
There are different roles. It's just like working within the government sector or the private sector. There are different roles and positions. Same applies to the third sector. You can operate within the managerial level or within the leadership level, or you can even become a volunteer, or you can become a patron. There are different positions within the sector. As long as you feel comfortable and you think you are knowledgeable enough within a specific area, then of course you are free to operate from that angle.
Nice. If you take a step back actually to basic definitions, what actually is the third sector? For those that are wondering, you know, there's obviously the private sector, the public sector, but what is the third sector?
The third sector is the third strand of society. We have the government sector, which is made up of the people who govern us, those who make policies, those who manage our economy, and those who represent us at the top, the people we vote for every 4 years. That is the government. And then we have the private sector, which of course you know what they do. The private sector is a bedrock of the economy. You know, every economy needs the private sector as the engine to propel it further. And then we have the third sector, which is made up of charities, voluntary organizations, community organizations, faith-based organizations like churches and Muslim organizations, social enterprises, and lobby and advocacy groups. You know, so all these groups come together and constitute the third sector. And what the third sector does basically is to address the areas that is neglected by both government and the private sector.
So why are these areas often neglected by both the private sector and government in the first place?
Those areas are neglected as a result of socioeconomic conditions. For example, we have rural areas, we have villages, we have people who are struggling. And of course, policymakers are busy formulating policies and doing politics. You know, so we tend to neglect these people. They become marginalized. And so that's when the third sector come in to support them. For example, when you take homeless children, homeless people, teenage mothers, or people with multiple health conditions who fall off the radar, then it is the duty of the third sector to step in and address those situations.
And I imagine to a great extent, it's also because the private sector would ignore these groups because they don't make economic sense. They're not economically viable as a demographic, so they're not going to invest to take them on as customers. And then the government perhaps might also ignore this group because they don't form part of that sort of the swing vote or the people that would end up putting them in power, so they can often be ignored unless if the media shines a light on them. So you've got this catch-22 where both private and public sectors are not fully incentivized to engage, and then that's where the third sector steps up.
Private sector, yes, because they are in to make profit and to maximize the profit. So obviously they would not like to deal with the marginalized because nothing will come from that angle. You know, they would like to look at a place or a sector where more money will flow into their business. However, government has a responsibility for that area, for the marginalized. You know, but unfortunately, government is busy doing other things. And it will interest you, or it may interest you to know that government comes back to the same group, the marginalized group, to solicit for votes when it's time for elections. You know, but when it's time, when it's due for them to provide basic logistics, that's when politicians ignore them. And that is when we step in as the third sector.
Fantastic. Within those different roles to help support.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So in your experience within the third sector, can you share a little bit more around maybe some of the trends you've seen over time within the sector, perhaps in the UK or in Ghana?
I think there are quite a few of examples to give, but for the purposes of time, I'll try and compress it. I think the issues we do have, which is being addressed. Let me take the COVID example for issue. For example, the third sector did about 90% of what is to be done.
Really?
Yes, because the third sector...
Actually, that's a good point. I got my first vaccine at a church in North London. Yeah.
Yeah, and the church is part of the voluntary sector.
Course, yeah.
You know, the third sector were on the ground. They were visiting the vulnerable. They were talking and providing services to the hard to reach. You know, whereas government was dealing with policies and how to address the issues and how to get vaccines in and how to revive the economy. You know, the third sector was on the ground providing services, making contact, distributing food, giving advice, relief aid, and so on. So that is one of the trends that is more viable to society. Then, of course, if you look at where we have disasters, like you have Pakistan or India or any other country that has experienced earthquake, it is the Red Cross, it is the Save the Children who goes there. It is water aid that goes there to provide services. Whereas policymakers, again, will be talking at the top. You know, how do we get the funding? How do we get support and so on? But it's the grassroots voluntary sector organizations who are actually providing the right, they are the stopgap, if you want. Yeah.
And in terms of the enabling framework or supporting policy to allow the third sector to get on with their job, is there anything you'd like to comment on?
Yes. Okay. I think third sectors within developed countries are thriving. They are thriving because government recognizes their work and effort, appreciates it. And so government puts in systems and policies to make it possible for them to work or to facilitate their efforts. For example, in the UK, we have the Charities Act, which is more or less the law that protects third sector organizations. And then we have the Office of the Civil Society, which is within Cabinet Office, which oversees the work of third sector organizations. So there is some support. And then when you look at countries like Australia, America, Netherlands, and so on, they all have effective mechanism to facilitate, not to control, but to facilitate the work of third sector organizations. Unfortunately, however, it is the opposite in countries like Africa, you know, and some Asian countries where third sector organizations are seen as subversive organizations. You know, governments are in competition with them because they are in direct contact with the people. So governments see them as opposition and thorn in their flesh.
Lots of knowledge, lots of knowledge. Thank you so much for that. I'm afraid that's all we have time for in this segment, but don't go away. We'll be coming back right after this with more on community and our special guest in the studio, John Kweku-Mensah. Welcome back to our final segment on community. Still with us in the studio is John Kweku-Mensah, and we are talking about community. I'm your host, Nzube Ufodike, on Slay Stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just before the break, we were talking about the frameworks, and we contrasted the developed countries against the developing countries where it seems there's more competition and less of a supportive network for charities. Do you mind expanding on that with just maybe one or two case studies we can, if you're happy to share?
Yes. If you take a country like Ghana, for instance, we have a large number of voluntary organizations, which is the third sector organizations. But unfortunately, what is happening there is that politicians have more or less infiltrated into their system. And so they have become less effective. And politicians are using money to redirect the attention of third sector organizations. So third sector organizations are not able to campaign and advocate effectively to promote their work because they have become more or less an arm of the government. And then secondly, there are laws that permit the government to close down NGOs, laws that does not allow NGOs to thrive, laws that make it impossible for them to deliver effective services. Now, I used Ghana, but this situation cuts across most African countries. And then in some African countries, the third sector organization has to register every year. Whereas in the developed country, for like UK, for instance, you register once as a charity, and that is for forever. As long as the organization continue to exist, you know. But over there, the problem is more of political, you know, trying to suppress them, not to give them the opportunity to operate as effective as they would want to do.
And I guess because of the nature of the third sector, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Yes.
is it as inclusive, or is it more or less inclusive than the rest of society, in your view?
I think that's where the problem is. Once upon a time, no, it wasn't. Let me use this country as an example. In the UK, we have about 168,000 registered charity. And then
168,000?
168,000 registered. And then we have almost 100,000 of organizations that are operating as voluntary organizations, but have not been registered. Now, you ask me who constitutes this huge number. We have a lot of people working within that sector, but inclusivity is a problem. You know, it's not very well diverse. Now, if you look at this total number of 168, it's just about 10 to 11% that makes up make the Black and Asian community. The rest of it is more of a white dominated sector. And then if you look at women, women constitute about 46 to 48% of the total numbers I've given you. So inclusivity is a bit of a problem. I am part of the Institute of Fundraising, and for the past 5 years now, we've been doing some work in terms of diversity. And we do have quite a number of professional fundraisers, but they don't get to the top there, you know. And then when you look at the boards of the big charities, very rarely do you see black faces there. It's just like the corporate sector. So this is something that is going on for some time, and hopefully we'll get there, you know.
Right. So if I get you correctly, you suggested about 11% of the workforce within the third sector is black and brown. So it's not as ethnically diverse, but nearly 47% female. So that representation seems to kind of mirror society more broadly. But my question really is, in terms of the service users for the third sector organizations, is that proportional, or is there a skew in terms of the service users?
Service users is not proportional. I think it's open to everybody. In fact, when you talk about diversity, it's rather the others, the BME group, who benefits a lot from it. So it's kind of balanced at that level. You know, but I'm talking about the managerial level, the management, the leadership, and so on. That's where we do have problems with diversity. Yeah, but when it comes to beneficiaries, is quite balanced.
That makes sense. And what advice do you have for anyone that's trying to get into the third sector, wants to start a career?
I think my advice to people who are aspiring, especially young people, is that the third sector is one good area for us to venture into. Not only do you engage in it as a job, but also it's something that you do because you love it. You get the opportunity to work with people, to see your work in practice, and also develop yourself. There's a lot of personal development opportunities, and then a lot of satisfaction because you see the result of your work, the impact of your work on the beneficiary of your services.
Do you get paid?
Yes, we within the voluntary sector, there are two aspects of it.
Yeah.
There is the full employment bit, and then there is also the voluntary part of it. If you go in as an employee or if you go in as a full worker, yes, you get paid.
Okay.
You know, and then if you want to be a volunteer, then you don't get paid.
Yeah, because unless if you're a trust fund baby, it's going to
Yes.
be hard to engage as a volunteer for, you
Yes.
know, an indefinite amount of time because you need to obviously.
But it's slowly picking up.
Okay.
It's becoming a profession, a vocation now, because we have universities doing masters and PhDs in charity work, charity management and voluntary sector activities. You know, so slowly we are getting there.
Indeed. I've been an active volunteer in charities. I've been a volunteer at your charity. I
Yes.
found that completely soul enriching. I also participated in a couple of other charities, and I agree with you. You know, volunteering and community engagement is very important. I think in the US there tends to be a lot more of that
Yes.
spirit than there
Yes.
is in the
Yes.
UK. I don't know if you find that to be the same.
Yeah, there is that spirit which is quite high in the UK. Until recently, in the UK, when a young person applies for a job, one of the things they look out for in his CV is volunteering experience. Have you volunteered before?
Gotcha.
You know, and some institutions, you know, some companies are even trying to set up opportunity for young employees to go out into the community and do some voluntary work, you know, to hone your skills and then to give you that soft skills abilities as well, you know, because we need that to be able to thrive in society as individuals and as collective.
Fantastic. My dad say, Papa.
Matse.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but it's been a real pleasure speaking with John Kweku-Mensah on our episode called Community. Thank you so much for staying with us. I'm Unzube, your host at Stay Stories. Until the next time, goodbye.